Victor, wearing an apron with ties protecting the front part of his work clothes from damage and dirt, was almost finished. It wasn't allowed to take the waste somewhere to burn. Emergency services were closely monitoring what was happening in the nearby cottage village. A taxi stopped next to him, and a young girl got out. The car immediately drove away. She turned to Victor and asked, "Can you tell me where I can find Victor Gregory?" "Emily, is that you?" "Dad, it's me. I found out the truth about what happened many years ago and came to ask for forgiveness for my behavior and my attitude toward you." "Emily, come on. Let's have some tea with jam and talk. We haven't seen each other for almost 10 years. Come in. Are you hungry?" "No, thank you. Tea will be enough for now." They walked into the yard. Victor led his daughter into a small house on the property. It was warm inside. A table stood there with stools, and shelves were lined with jars of different types of jam. There was also some honey. Emily asked, "Dad, do you work here as a janitor?" "Well, yes, as a janitor too. And no, I don't store the honey here permanently. I'll soon move it to the basement of the cottage." Emily looked out the window and saw a woman in a tracksuit walking toward them along the path. She said, "Looks like the owner's coming. Will there be a scandal because of me?" "No, there won't be," Victor replied. The woman entered the small house and said reproachfully to Victor, "Why did you bring your daughter here to drink tea in the utility room? Don't we have any other place? Am I disturbing you?" "How do you know I'm his daughter?" Emily asked. "Your photo is on his desk. Let's introduce ourselves. I'm Julia, and you must be Emily." "Yes, I'm Emily." "Then let's go to the house. No need to hide in the utility room. Or have you hidden some brandy or whiskey here?" "No, nothing like that," Victor replied. "Then let's go." Victor hung his apron on the hook, and they all went into the house. Julia suggested that while Victor was changing clothes, Emily could wash her hands in the bathroom. As Emily was making her way to the kitchen, a huge cat came out. Julia said, "Don't be afraid of him. He's a cheerful and sociable cat, very fast, curious, and clean. His favorite places are the high shelves where he can watch everything happening around. We recently weighed him before a show. He's 8.2 kilograms. His name is Mars." Julia set the table, placed glasses, and soon Victor came downstairs. They poured drinks and toasted their reunion. Emily began telling her story. "When you and Mom divorced, I wasn't in the city. I only found out about it from her. She told me you had cheated on her, left both of us, and ran away to avoid paying alimony." "That's not true," Victor interrupted. "We didn't divorce right away. Constantine came and said he was going to live with my wife, and she confirmed it. To avoid any problems, he brought the police with him. Since I wasn't officially registered in the house, the police made me leave. I spent that night at the train station because I had nowhere else to go." Emily was shocked. "Mom never told me any of this. She said you had left us and refused to pay for anything." "I paid alimony all these years and even covered your university tuition. Your mother asked me to do that. I didn't want you to suffer because of what happened between us," Victor explained. "I only found out a week ago," Emily continued. "I'm getting married soon, and when I told Mom and Constantine, I overheard them discussing how they should find you and get money from you for my wedding. That's when I realized they had been lying to me for all these years." "How did you find out, Dad?" "I'm getting married," Emily said. "Congratulations." "So when I got home and announced it over dinner to Mom and Constantine, they seemed happy. I went to my room and they stayed in the kitchen, but I could hear everything from my room, what they were talking about in the kitchen. That's when I found out that you had been paying for my education. Constantine was demanding that Mom find you and get money from you for my wedding. He said he was sure you weren't struggling." "I'm really not," Victor responded. "I'll pay for your wedding myself. Moreover, I will be there, and we'll have our father-daughter dance. We just need to rehearse it first. All I need is a ticket to your city." When I arrived at the train station, I met Julia. She had separated from her husband and had nowhere to live. Her father had a room in the city, and that's where we ended up. "That's where they found me, for the alimony and the divorce," Victor continued. "And then?" Emily asked. "Life was hard. There were times we had nothing to eat, but we never resorted to stealing. One day I discovered an invention. As I studied it, I realized it was my work. I had created it, and all the rights belonged to me. I offered it to one businessman, but he refused. Instead, he gave me money so that I could start producing it myself, purely on trust. And it worked out. Little by little, I got back on my feet. I made Julia the director and co-owner of the company. We paid off all the debts. And how did you find me? Victor asked. I realized that since you had been paying alimony, there had to be a court decision somewhere. And since you were divorced from Mom, I found the divorce certificate. When Mom filed for the divorce at the registry office, they found the court case file. My fiancé helped me. He has friends in the police. All right, let's toast to our reunion, Victor said. They raised their glasses and had a drink. So, what did you tell your mom about where you were going? Victor asked. I didn't tell her anything. I'm living with my fiancé now. But in that house, there are still Constantine's 2 sons. And what's your fiancé's name? Alex. When will we meet him? Probably at the wedding. But there's the issue of money. I can't count on Mom or Constantine. Don't worry about money, sweetheart. Don't tell your mother anything. And as for Alex, tell him that the financial side is all taken care of. And about living arrangements? We're staying with Alex's parents for now. I don't want to live with Mom, and there's no space at her place anyway. Why don't you settle in the region? Alex has a good job here, friends, and an apartment. Well, that will come with time. Besides, didn't your mom promise you the house? She did, but I haven't forgotten that Constantine has 2 sons. Sweetheart, he never invested a penny in you, and his kids are living in that house for nothing. Okay, let's rest for today and discuss everything tomorrow. Julia will go to your city with you to help sort everything out, and I'll show up at the wedding. Tomorrow after breakfast, I'll tell you all about the hardships that befell your mother and Constantine after they kicked me out. They finished dinner. Julia stayed behind to clean the kitchen. Emily offered to help, but Julia said, "Go and rest. You've had a long journey. Tomorrow, sleep as much as you want." "Oh, I'll sleep a lot." "Then rest well. Mars will come and wake you up." "Isn't he allowed outside?" "He knows the boundaries of our property. If he lets anyone in, it'll be another cat, but he'll chase away everyone else. And people. He won't touch people." Emily went to the room prepared for her. Julia asked her husband, who was sitting at the table, "Why are you staring at that glass? Finish your drink and tell me, did you know your daughter would show up?" Back then, many years ago, my wife and her then lover threw a genetic test result on the table and told me that Emily wasn't my daughter. "Then why did you pay alimony and for her education all these years?" "Because I believe a father is the one who raises a child, and I did that for 15 years before the divorce." "But you never contacted her." "Julia, you know I was always nearby, making sure she was safe. And now? Now it's time they pay the price." "What do you mean?" "I want to serve them a cold dish." "Revenge?" "Yes. I will never forgive them for the humiliation I had to endure. I forgave my ex. He drank himself to death and froze under a fence. I even had to deal with the police and pay for his funeral." "He drank himself to death and froze under a fence," Julia said. "I even had to deal with the police and pay for his funeral myself." "I don't know. Maybe you're right. In any case, I'm on your side." Victor woke up early. Trying not to disturb his wife, he quietly walked barefoot out of the bedroom. Suddenly, he heard her voice behind him. "Where are you going without your slippers?" "The floor is cold." "Mars runs around barefoot, and he's fine," he replied. "Mars is a cat, and nothing happens to him. But you're a normal person. You have slippers." "Julia, go back to sleep. I just remembered that we have a guest in the house, and she'll need breakfast. Plus, someone needs to clean up after Mars." "Go ahead. Emily will sleep for a long time, and I'll take care of Mars." "Yeah, sure," Victor chuckled. "Our furry friend is probably hiding somewhere, hunting for Emily." "You don't know Mars well," Julia laughed. "He's most likely already snuck into her room and claimed a spot on her bed." "All right, I'll be in my study." Julia got up after him, threw on a robe, and quietly went downstairs. She headed to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out some eggs, placing them in warm water. Then she stepped out onto the veranda, cleaned Mars's litter box, and returned to the kitchen. She heard footsteps coming from the hallway. Someone was walking barefoot. It was Emily. "Emily, why are you walking barefoot?" Julia asked. "Mars won't give me my slippers back, and I don't want to fight with him." Julia smiled, went into the guest room, took the slippers from Mars and handed them to Emily. Go wash up and come to breakfast, Julia said. She placed a pot of water on the stove, added a tablespoon of salt, and brought it to a boil. She put the eggs, warm to room temperature, into the boiling water, set the timer for 1 minute, then turned off the heat and left the eggs in the hot water for 4 more minutes. After that, she poured cold water over them. Emily appeared in the kitchen, and Julia called out loudly, Victor, come for breakfast. Victor came downstairs. These eggs are soft-boiled, Julia explained to Emily. The pasta is made from durum wheat. We got hooked on it after our trip to Italy. They call it pasta there. And we also have a salad with beans, smoked sausage, and croutons. Looks delicious, Emily smiled. Julia, where's the coffee? Victor asked. First breakfast, then coffee. Sit down. And where's Mars? He's sulking because I took Emily's slippers from him. Why did you name him Mars? Isn't that the god of war? Emily asked. At first we called him Marcy. He was a sweet, playful kitten. But when we moved into this house, he started to claim his own territory outside. Back then, our yard wasn't fenced in, and Mars would chase every dog that came close. He would even sneak into other yards, scare the dogs into their kennels, and then wait in ambush for them to come out. We had to install a fence quickly, Victor added, before he got into serious trouble. That explains why he didn't let me sleep last night, Emily laughed. He snuck into my room, grabbed my slipper, and lay down at my feet, purring so loudly it sounded like an airplane taking off. He also loves to meow constantly. How do you manage his fur? Emily asked. We have a cleaning lady who comes 3 times a week, Julia replied. After breakfast, Victor invited Emily into his study. He called out to Julia to join them, but she responded, You two talk. I'll come later. I want to tidy up the study. Victor sat at his desk with Emily across from him. Would you like some coffee? Victor asked. No, thank you. I'm still full from breakfast. Well, I'll have some, he said, setting up his coffee machine. After a moment, he began his story. Many years ago, I came home late on a Wednesday evening. It had been a tough week. I was working my regular job while also developing a new product. My boss, Constantine, wasn't helping at all. In fact, he was making things harder. All I wanted was to come home, sit in my chair, have a cold beer, and relax. He sighed deeply. But when I walked into the kitchen, I saw Constantine sitting there with my wife, your mother. She looked at me and said, Victor, we need to talk. Right then, I knew there would be no relaxing that night. She had a child from him. You know that already, and she was very happy that your mother left such a loser like me, Victor continued. She even placed a DNA test result in front of me and said that from now on, Constantine would be living with her since the cottage belonged to her. Didn't you try to challenge that? Emily asked. I wanted to, but 2 policemen came out of the room and recommended that I leave the house and go back to the place where I was registered. I gathered my documents and left the cottage under police escort. And what did you do next? What could I do? I tried to call you, but you didn't answer. I was sitting at the train station using the only thing I had left, my laptop. I hid all my inventions in it, making sure Constantine wouldn't get anything. He never had any ideas of his own. Even now, they live off the remnants of what I left behind. But there's one thing he doesn't know. The company I built here has completely destroyed his market positions. Or rather, it already has. He has no customers left, and his suppliers have abandoned him. So you waited all this time to get revenge on him? I wasn't only getting revenge on him, I wanted both of them to pay. But I needed you to finish your education first. That was the most important thing to me. And now you're getting married. It's the best gift you could give me. What else did they say back then? They said Constantine would fire me and that I'd spend the rest of my life in poverty. I was shocked. All this was coming from the woman I had married, the woman I had loved. Later, I realized the DNA test was fake. I had another one done myself, and my suspicions were confirmed. And why didn't I know anything about this? You were living in the dormitory. I got a DNA sample from your hairbrush. I can't believe this. So you were watching me? No, I wasn't following you personally, but I made sure you were safe. And honestly, your upcoming marriage was a surprise to me. I still can't believe it. Mom told me you were working as some janitor, but she didn't know where. She lied. She knew. She even came to see me once when your stepfather refused to pay for your education. She brought me the bank account number, and I transferred money there. I even checked. The money was going directly to you. At that moment, Julia entered the room. She took a cup and began making herself coffee. Emily, do you want some coffee? Sure, just a little. And he's hiding sweets somewhere, Julia teased. I'm not hiding them. I just don't eat them often, Victor replied. Emily refused coffee earlier, but still wants something sweet, Julia said, handing her a box of marshmallows. All right, Victor said. So, what did you think of everything I told you? I'm still processing it all, Emily admitted. It's a lot to take in. Julia laughed softly. When I met Victor, he was in terrible shape, unshaven, hungry, and lost. And how did you know he was hungry? Emily asked. Because I was starving too, Julia replied with a smile. I gave him a piece of my sandwich and we started talking. He wasn't very talkative back then, but he was grateful. That was how we ended up spending our first night together. In my father's storage room, Victor added. We slept on the cold floor for a month before I managed to buy a mattress and gave it to Julia. Like a true gentleman, Emily laughed. Those were hard times, Victor said, but we survived. Later, I met a businessman who was visiting the area. I offered him my inventions. He didn't take them, but gave me money to start my own production. He believed in me. That's how I started teaching Julia about entrepreneurship. Hey, he didn't teach me. I figured it out myself pretty quickly. Julia laughed. And now our company is the strongest in the area. And didn't Constantine notice the competition? Emily asked. Oh, he noticed, Victor replied. He even came to meet with Julia twice. But nothing came out of those meetings. He never realized that I was behind everything. Even now, he doesn't know. A month ago, we lowered our product prices, and his remaining customers left him. The remaining customers left him and came to us. Now they're having serious problems. Their team isn't used to actually working, Victor said. Dad, from what I understand, their arguments and problems started a long time ago. They began right after they kicked you out, Emily added thoughtfully. But there's no point in discussing them any further. Let's talk about your wedding. So you'll be going back home with Julia. Slowly, you'll introduce her to your fiancé. You said he's an economist? Yes, and his company has great prospects, Emily answered. On the outskirts, all companies seem promising, but some barely scrape by from paycheck to paycheck, while others steal shamelessly, and then the management disappears or hides abroad. Along with prospects, there must be stability, Victor said seriously. And where should he work then? Well, Julia will talk to Alex, and we'll offer him a position in our office in the regional center. We need someone trustworthy there. We can't just hire anyone for the branch, Victor explained. And where would they live, Dad? That's also an issue. That's a solvable problem. We'll figure it out, Victor reassured her. Tell me, why did you decide to come find me? I found out the truth and wanted to apologize. For myself and for my mother. And I wanted to invite you to my wedding. I even brought money for your travel, but I see now you don't need it. You're right, but thank you for the invitation, Victor replied warmly. Meanwhile, Isabel sat at the table with a glass of wine. She hadn't even noticed how much she had been drinking lately. Life with Constantine had turned out to be nothing like she had imagined. Constantine had been on edge for the past month. Irritable, drinking heavily, and even his friends had started to avoid him. Isabel had learned that things at his work were falling apart, and yet Victor had left behind a financially stable company. But soon after, a new business producing similar products opened in a nearby district. Their prices were lower, so most of Constantine's clients switched over. Constantine had even gone himself to meet the director of the competing company, a woman. At first, he tried to intimidate her, claiming he had patents for the products and that she was producing them illegally. But the truth was, Constantine had always lived a lie. He knew full well that the patent had been issued to Victor. Despite the bureaucracy and paperwork, Victor had officially registered all his inventions with the government's intellectual property office. Constantine later tried to make peace. He visited the woman again, suggesting they split the market and create a monopoly, but she politely refused. Isabel poured herself another glass of wine and thought about her miserable life. Constantine had 2 sons from a previous marriage. Over time, they had moved into her cottage. Their mother didn't care much about them, and the boys being old enough started bringing girls into the house. Isabel had tried to talk to Constantine about it, but ended up in a huge argument. Eventually, Constantine insisted that she register his sons at her house officially. To make matters worse, the older son even tried to court Emily, but she firmly rejected him and soon moved to the regional center for university. Constantine insisted that Victor pay for Emily's education. There had been a big fight over that, especially since when they kicked Victor out of the house, they had thrown a fake DNA test at him, trying to prove that Emily wasn't his daughter. Victor had taken the fake test when he left, but Isabel still forced him to pay child support. Now Constantine thought they could pressure Victor into paying for Emily's education too. The fake DNA test was always a risky lie. Constantine knew that at any moment, Victor could claim it was forged. But in Emily's birth certificate, Victor was still listed as the father. Victor was still listed as the father on Emily's birth certificate. It was strange that Emily had never asked for money and never seemed to have any debts. At least that's what Isabel thought. The news that Emily was planning to get married sparked a new scandal. Constantine's son was openly living with his latest girlfriend, and they made no effort to hide it. They cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner for everyone in the house, behaving as if they owned the place. Isabel hated weekends the most, although weekdays weren't much better. Constantine's sons didn't work and constantly asked him for money to fund their parties. When Isabel mentioned their financial problems, Constantine simply told her to go find a job. Eventually, though, he did something. Small amounts of money started appearing on Isabel's bank account. Emily, who had come for a short visit, was living with her fiancé. She was an adult now, but Isabel often thought back to that day 10 years ago when she and Constantine had tricked 5-year-old Emily into believing that her father Victor had abandoned them. But now everything was falling apart. Constantine outright refused to pay for Emily's wedding, suggesting that the groom's parents should cover all the expenses. Isabel didn't know how to break the news to Emily. She had no idea how to find her ex-husband Victor. The last time she had seen him was almost 7 years ago when she demanded money from him for Emily's education. At that time, Victor was working as a janitor at a small company. Isabel didn't know the details. Victor had barely managed to put on a dark work coat and rush outside to meet her, pretending to be just a simple janitor. She handed him a bank account number for Emily's tuition payments. Victor told her that he was being fired from that company and didn't know where he would work next. He also gave her his phone number, but Isabel lost it soon after. Now she was desperately looking for a way out of this situation. She couldn't tell Emily the truth and asked Constantine to at least lend her some money. The next morning, Isabel and Constantine left the house early, driving to the regional center. After a brief stop in the city, they headed to a cafe where Emily's fiancé, Alex, was already waiting for them. The conversation mostly revolved around economics, as Alex was an economist. After they finished, Julia, who had joined them, made an unexpected suggestion. "Alex, would you be interested in managing our office in the regional center? We'd offer you a good salary, much higher than what you're making now." "And what about housing?" Alex asked cautiously. "I've spoken with Victor, Emily's father. He said it wouldn't be a problem," Julia replied. They also discussed the wedding plans. Julia continued, "We don't want a huge celebration. Victor has only one daughter, and he's willing to cover everything. Don't worry about the money. There's a great restaurant in your city with a banquet hall right next to the best hotel. We plan to stay there when we come for the wedding." "Have you been to this city before?" Alex asked. "Yes, but it was a long time ago for Victor's business," Julia answered. "I'll talk to Emily about the job offer, and we'll get back to you," Alex said. They finished dinner, and Julia returned to the hotel where Victor had booked her a room. After spending the night there, she wrapped up some errands in the city and drove back to meet Victor. That evening, Julia and Victor sat together at home over dinner. "So how was it?" Victor asked. "Alex is a smart young man. He's been working as an economist for 2 years and seems very capable. I think he'll do well managing the regional office," Julia replied. "And what about the wedding plans?" "I found the perfect place. A banquet hall near the registry office and a hotel close by. It's all conveniently located." "Thank you for taking care of everything," Victor said, smiling. "No, thank you for being here," Julia replied softly. "I often think about how much better things could have been if we had met earlier." She only knew what her mother had told her. The important thing is that she doesn't say anything to her mother now, Victor said. Victor, tell me honestly, did you know she was getting married? Julia asked. Of course I knew. I liked the young man, and I did some research on him a while ago, Victor replied. So my conversation with him was pointless? Julia chuckled. No, Julia, you have a special gift for seeing people's true intentions. You saw right through me that night at the train station. Did you meet him in person? No, there was no need. But I knew everything about him. He studied at my university, just in a different field. Economics. When are we going to prepare the gift for the newlyweds? You'll need to go to the regional center and arrange the paperwork for Emily. You want to give her the car and the cottage, right? Yes, we already have the cottage where we live, and there's plenty of space for future grandchildren. Or do you think differently? No, you're right. She's a good daughter, and her future husband is a decent man. We should help them start their life together. The day of the wedding arrived. Constantine and Isabel stood inside the registry office, waiting for the bride and groom. First, the groom's car arrived, followed shortly by the bride's. Everyone gathered in the waiting hall. Where are your sons? Isabel asked Constantine, clearly annoyed. They said they'd go straight to the restaurant, he replied dismissively. Just then, Isabel's eyes landed on a couple entering the hall, Victor and Julia. Victor looked sharp in an elegant suit, and Julia's dress complemented him perfectly. They walked over to the bride and groom, exchanged a few words, and then the ceremony organizer called the bride, groom, and witnesses to their designated rooms. Constantine recognized Julia and approached her. So, you're Victor's wife? Yes, Julia replied calmly. When you came to me, first with threats, then with offers, you didn't even notice that Victor's office was right across from mine. His photo was on my desk. I must have forgotten to remove it before visiting you, Julia said with a smirk. Everyone was invited into the ceremony hall, where the official part began, signing documents, exchanging rings, and the formal speech from the registry officer. Everything went smoothly. Finally, the announcer declared the father-daughter dance. Emily confidently walked past Constantine, ignoring his attempt to approach her, and invited Victor to dance. At the same time, Alex invited Julia to the dance floor. After the song ended, a new melody began, and Emily and Alex had their first dance as a married couple. The entire ceremony took about an hour. After the registration, everyone congratulated the newlyweds and gave them flowers. Time flew by quickly. When the couple exited the registry office, they were showered with wheat grains, coins, and candy, a tradition believed to bring prosperity, luck, and children. The weather was warm and autumnal, so the newlyweds decided to walk to the restaurant, which was nearby. In the restaurant, Isabel and Constantine were met with an unpleasant surprise. Their table was placed far away from the main guests and the newlyweds. The bride and groom sat at the main table with their witnesses. Close to them were Victor and Julia, treated as honored guests. Isabel felt humiliated. Her daughter was clearly expressing her disapproval. She opened her mouth to say something, but Constantine stopped her. Don't make a scene. Do you see who's sitting with the newlyweds? Do you know who the governor is? I still don't understand why I ever got involved with you. At that moment, Constantine's sons arrived with their girlfriends. They looked sloppy, wrinkled jeans, unbuttoned shirts, and casual jackets. After checking their coats, they walked over to the table. Couldn't you dress properly for the wedding? Isabel snapped. We look fine. We're not staying long, just to grab some food and drinks. But hey, can you give us some money for a taxi? Have you ever thought about getting a job? Our dad is a businessman. Look at the wedding his stepdaughter got. He can afford it, one of them smirked. Well, I'm done feeding you. From now on, find your own way, Isabel snapped. And how are we supposed to live? Ask your father for money. A heated argument broke out at the table. Eventually, Constantine, his sons, and their girlfriends left the banquet hall in a huff. Victor approached Isabel, who sat alone at her table. So, where did your cavalry go? He asked coldly. They're probably off packing their things, Isabel replied bitterly. You know, like Griboyedov wrote in Woe from Wit, fresh is the tale, but hard to believe. Do you really think Constantine will give you the house? He has 2 sons, and they'll need somewhere to live. You think I deserve all this? Isabel, you destroyed your own life. You could have been happy, but you chose Constantine. You took pleasure in kicking me out, humiliating me. But in the end, who won? She had no answer, Victor asked. So where did your knights in shining armor go? They went to pack their things, Isabel replied bitterly. As Chatsky said in Gribadov's Woe from Wit, a fresh tale, but hard to believe. Constantine isn't a fool. He won't give you the cottage. He has two sons and they need somewhere to live. Their mother doesn't want them either. I was planning to give the cottage to my daughter and her husband. You're too late. They already have a house in the region. They'll be moving there soon. Tell me, was this all you're doing? Did you plan everything? Destroy my life? No, Victor answered coldly. You did that yourself. You and Constantine worked hard to make sure of it. I hope you were happy with him. Our first big argument happened the day after you left. I didn't leave. I was kicked out. With the police, no less. You had a self-sufficient, caring man, but you chose an affair with Constantine, and now you've lost everything. At first, cheating brought you pleasure, but even then, you paid for it by losing a good life. I went through hell, but now I've been rewarded. I have a wonderful wife, a beautiful and intelligent daughter. Victor and Julia continued living in their cottage, frequently visiting Emily and Alex. Alex excelled in his new job, managing the office skillfully. A year later, Emily gave birth to a daughter. When they brought their granddaughter to visit Victor and Julia, Mars the cat immediately took on the role of her protector. Everything in Isabel's life turned out exactly as Victor had predicted. Constantine, along with his two sons, demanded that Isabel divide the cottage. But Constantine had forgotten one important detail. Isabel was a co-owner of the company where he worked. She turned to Victor for help. Soon, a financial audit was conducted at the company. During the inspection, Constantine tried to bribe the head of the commission, but was caught red-handed. He was sentenced to several years in prison. To make matters worse, his sons were also arrested shortly after. They had been caught robbing a nightclub. All three ended up serving time together. And so, the story ends. Reflecting on it, you realize once again that the best revenge is served cold. As they say, revenge is a dish best served cold. What do you think about this? I look forward to reading your comments.